Thank you, Bridget. Good afternoon and or morning, depending on where you are joining us from, and I appreciate you taking some time to spend a few minutes with us to understand, get some insight on a very interesting topic and something that's driving a lot of value for integration partners and our healthcare customers. So today we're going to be talking about some key network benefits around technology and enterprise edge virtualization specific to healthcare as it relates to, in particular, business continuity. So table of contents, so what we're going to cover today, I'm going to be partnering with a colleague of mine, David Bingham, where we're going to talk, tag team this as well. David's a longstanding expert in IT healthcare technology. He'll tell you a little bit about that later. But what we're going to cover is some key trends that are sort of driving the needs for virtualization, some of the inherent IT challenges that we can address and solve, what actual edge virtualization is, and ultimately kind of, in closing, kind of some key takeaways and things to think about. But before David jumps in and kind of goes into a little more detail, I want to tell you a little bit about integration partners. Integration Partners, we are headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts. The company started in 1999. We have a discrete healthcare practice, which is the largest single vertical we serve. Like I mentioned, we're headquartered in Boston. However, we have a national footprint. So our healthcare customers are sort of all shapes and sizes, from multinational systems, national systems, even down to regional community hospitals. Our business model is centered around systems integration. We're also a value-added reseller in a number of areas, and then we also provide managed services to our customers. The big takeaway for the folks that work with integration partners today is sort of our ability to execute upon our mission. We're an engineer-centric firm. For every single salesperson we have out in the field, we have 3 engineers generally supporting them, whether it's pre-sales architecture support, consulting services, or post-sales engineering. But our mission is to provide excellent customer experiences by delivering technology through engineering excellence and integrity. The other sort of key thing that we think sets us apart from many folks in our space is our adherence to our values and our values themselves. We have a number of things there you can see in the kind of gray, green, blue box there, but the most important things are, number 1, we care about each other. Number 2, we care about our customers. The way we run our business is, if ever we're going to make an investment or make a change in strategy or add a capability, we say, okay, does this make integration partners a better place to work? And does this make us easier to do business with, or is this better for our customers? If we can't answer yes to both those things, generally we don't move forward. I mentioned some of our healthcare customers. Actually, I'm going to go back just a little bit. One thing I do want to talk about, and I think it's important for context of today, is Integration Partners is a HIMSS Analytics infram consultant. So obviously you folks are familiar with HIMSS, at least a high level. You're joining a HIMSS webinar. But HIMSS Analytics is actually a subsidiary of HIMSS. It's a consulting organization that provides insights around how to take healthcare technology, make sure it's patient-centric. They do this through sort of benchmarking and maturity models, right? Many of you may be familiar with the most popular or the longest-standing maturity model around MRAM for EMR adoption. But just the last couple of years, HIMSS Analytics has came up with a new maturity model called infram. So HIMSS Infram, it allows healthcare technology leaders to assess and map the technology infrastructure around critical capabilities to meet the different system goals and align the technology to different international benchmarks and standards, really all around transformation, right? Taking the organization, the organization's capability, understanding the technology capabilities and/or gaps to help speed them and enable their journey towards different transformation goals. So as I mentioned before, Integration Partners has a number of healthcare customers. Here's just a few of them. Some household names in the healthcare world and some folks that might be new to you. And sort of back to the whole infram piece, one thing I do want to say, and I can touch upon this as we wrap up, is, as a HIMSS Infram Analytics consultant certified by HIMSS, we offer that consulting service free of charge to our healthcare clients and the healthcare sector at large. So we'll let you know how to get in touch with us if that's something that interests you, that you'd like an assessment, or just like to learn more about the process. At this time, I'd like to transition the presentation to my colleague, David Bingham.
Thanks, David. Couple of Daves today. Appreciate the overview, and that was a great takeaway on Infram for sure. Just a little background on my journey in healthcare information technology. I've been in the industry and mostly in the state of Colorado for over 20 years. And I started really as a network manager and a network engineer, and then moved my way into leadership roles up to and including CIO and IT director in various organizations in the state of Colorado. And so the exciting thing about this technology, I think, when I look at over the course of my career, I think about, starting with, networks like Novell Networks on, ArcNet, local area network technology. And then you look at the capabilities and where we've come with both internet and being able to spread out wide area networks. It's really exciting to see how solutions like what we're talking about today connect the dots in the real world back to the isolated healthcare facility, whether it's community hospital or a larger health system. And in Colorado, I've been involved in both community hospital, critical access hospital of 25 beds, up to one of the larger healthcare systems in the state of Colorado. So that's kind of my background. And, in these times, there's several drivers and things that are, creating the need for expansion, what we call expanding the healthcare footprint. And what that really means is not so much specifically to large healthcare organizations. It can also be community hospitals. As the community hospital that I was the CIO for, we had many locations that we had to reach to integrate with both, provider clinics, health, departments of health, things like that in a small community. So this is not just restricted to what a large facility can do as far as extending their footprint. So among other drivers that are shifting healthcare these days, besides what we're currently going through in the environment, we know costs to treat chronic disease patients is going up. We know that there's a lot of focus on managing these costs. We know that revenue in the U.S. is shifting to value-based. So we're seeing decrease in revenue and competition for more patients. And so this is what drives us to increase our footprint as a healthcare organization. The patients are expecting a lot more. They're demanding higher quality. They're demanding what they're seeing in the consumerization out in the world on the internet. They also want it to be personalized. And this concept of anytime, anywhere convenience. And then, the third large pressure, of course, is cyber attacks and security. We know that, a breach record at this point, $408 per breach record, $2 million per incident. These things are real. Besides being, a penalty, it's also, impact to our reputation with our patients and our customers. So how are we addressing these as healthcare organizations? So in my experience in working in Colorado with a large facility, there are, mergers with other healthcare systems. There are acquisitions of clinics and other smaller hospitals and systems. And I would add another A into this. This is M&As, like typical merger and acquisitions. But I would add another A is affiliation. The concept that Epic would say is like community connect, where the EMR and IT technologies are extended to affiliated organizations, but there is no organizational management or merger of those facilities. It's just to, give that patient experience across the board consistent in a region. And, needing to engage physician consortia kind of follows under that affiliate line. How do you engage more providers that are independent and scattered around a region? How do we engage them and partner with them to solve some of these pressures that we're going through? And then there's the concept of the need to deploy temporary and mobile facilities, things we're going through in current times, testing tents, drive-through facilities, other needs for temporary and mobile facilities. And all of this falls under this heading of partnering, affiliation, and working together across disparate infrastructures and networks to achieve what we need to as a business. Todd Johnson had given us this quote, health systems that do not compete on access and convenience will see market share erode. The CIO of UC Health in the state of Colorado has said he has considered our competition to be more that which falls within this access and convenience realm more than individual health systems within the state of Colorado. And I thought that was very interesting. Apple and Microsoft and other large, massively large IT corporations are getting into healthcare. And so that can erode market share. And that gets eroded by, these interruptive technologies that provide access and convenience to consumers. Other trends in the healthcare that are kind of affecting this concept of network include, more imaging, 3D imaging, the introduction of artificial intelligence, personalized treatment, predictive analytics, all these things I think most people in the healthcare space understand. The use of cloud technologies in order to address all of these very important digital trends definitely puts demand on network resources and technology resources. So from my perspective, I've always said, kind of what I call the 3 pillars of solution evaluation. So as we get back to evaluating how do we address this from a network standpoint, the 3 criteria really fall under performance, security, and supportability. And performance really kind of translates into end user experience and as well as business continuity. Performance of a network means that you are able to give the user experience the appropriate bandwidth and the appropriate uptime for a clinician to not have technology get in the way of them providing care and doing the work that they need to do. Security, as obvious, we have a high obligation to both our patients, whether you look at this from a compliance and a legal standpoint or just doing the right thing with managing patient information. Security is obviously very important. And then the supportability, whatever solutions we come up with are not going to be successful from an organizational business perspective unless you can, resource the management of them and the lifespan of them correctly. It's very important when any decision is made about a technology that it's an understanding of what total cost of ownership and what the resources really are required to run it. I remember in some of my smaller hospital days, talking and seeing some of these great solutions that, either software or hardware providers would come up with, and I would be approached like, Dave, we've got this great solution for you. and the software would look awesome. And my retort to them, given that I had tight resources and a small staff, was, that is an awesome solution. Now, how am I going to run that? Like, you know, and 9 times out of 10, the answer would be, well, you just get one of your guys. And it's like, look, you know, one of my guys, all my guys are overbooked. All my, you know, guys and gals are doing everything they can to keep up with the demand of what we need to do to support our organization. We can't add one more thing on their plate, and we can't hire anybody more. So those kinds of things come into this supportability. You know, if you put in a new technology, how are you going to make sure that the technology is successful? So we started touching, or I've started touching on some of the challenges, you know, that we've faced. And this particular challenges I want to talk about are, you know, the network and how do you expand to these remote sites, whether it's temporary or an affiliation or an acquisition or just a new build for the organization. And I would say, you know, on this slide, we talk about a multi-region hospital system, but I've had the same problems and challenges at community level hospital, because there's still multiple locations that need to be dealt with in community hospitals, along with that concept that I said of affiliation, where you're extending your reach, whether it's EHR, IT services, to providers and clinics that are not actually part of the system, but need to function and partner with the system. So just a little caveat there. So, you know, at every location, you have multiple network devices. You know, we have this concept of how do you manage IT life cycles. So if you say that your network gear has a 3 or 5 year life cycle, it has to be planned. And what's the refresh look like? How are you keeping these things updated? How are you implementing security solutions at the edge that may need to be accounted for with different attack vectors that we learn about every, you know, seems like every day. You know, how are we protecting the edge in those extra locations? And then, of course, limited staff. You know, if all of your IT staff are centralized, you know, they're going to have to travel. There's costs associated with that, not only in just the resource, but the time to do things. And then the people at those locations should not be thinking about technology, right? They should just be thinking about providing care. They don't want technology to get in the way of them providing care. So this diagram kind of illustrates the typical deployment, right? So we have an outpatient treatment facility, we've got an affiliated physician, we've got a rural clinic, we've got a stack of things that have to be, in conventional wisdom, are all physical appliances. You know, I have my SD-WAN box, I've got to terminate my, you know, whether it's internet and or, you know, a Metro Ethernet or MPLS circuit. I've got a firewall, I've got to encrypt this data, I've got to route this data. So I have this stack, and then within this stack comes a resource requirement of an IT tech that has to, even if they're able to do it remotely, the amount of time to take to remotely update all these devices, and then when you run into problems, you're probably getting in the car and driving out to take care of the issue. So that's been one of the big challenges. So what does that translate to from a business perspective? Certainly, you know, service level agreements, you know, you're trying to meet that pillar of performance and make sure that you're providing a secure, quality end user experience that you can manage. And it's hard to meet those service level agreements, whether it's an actual contracted service level agreement or just an agreement in principle that I need to keep this site up and operational, requires upgrades. And when things go down, it impacts with lost revenue. And of course, if things are down, patients are dissatisfied. They showed up for a procedure and they couldn't get it done. And then, you know, there's this management of the capital expenditures for that stack of equipment, right? So you have a stack of equipment that was probably purchased under capital. And, you know, what do you have to do to keep that and still meet those 3 pillars. You may need to purchase additional spares over and above what you have in order to stay operational within service level agreements. And then the operating expense to maintain all that. So to do it correctly, meeting the value of that 3rd pillar of supportability, you have to have the people, the travel time, the staff, and supporting applications to make sure that you're able to meet those 3 pillars. Thus, you have a higher operating expense. So those all go into that concept of total cost of ownership. So these are the things that I've experienced, and many of us have experienced with that traditional stack, right? Too much touch, too much interruption of clinical services by deploying solutions that, while they meet the base need of a clinic, let's say, you put a stack out there and you're meeting the base need, but you're having outages because you haven't been able to utilize such things like SD-WAN, you potentially have security problems, you're interrupting what the clinical staff in those locations needs to focus on. And it's really difficult to manage the cost because now you have these buckets of cap expense, you have refresh rates on the equipment, you have licensing costs, you have resource costs. It's hard to really nail down what is the real cost of this stack of equipment that I've put out in this location. How do you manage upgrades? Do you, while we know some of those things can be done remotely, many times there are problems with remote upgrades, even just, firmware or software upgrades at the location, which could require a visit. May just be smart to have a visit just in case something happens so that you're not having any potential for downtime in that location. And then, if you have centralized staff and we're reaching out, in the state of Colorado, we can reach out up to 300 miles to an affiliate. And so there's travel time to go and deal with network outages and hardware upgrades and things like that. And then, of course, just the, security. I think, it's kind of hard to oversell or undersell security. I mean, security is very, very important. And the design of security systems is really kind of personal. If you think about it, it's up to your CISO or your, security officers within your facilities to define what is really necessary to meet the minimum requirement and what would you really want to be absolutely bulletproof. And there's costs and resources involved with that. And it's hard to make decisions, especially if, you come up with maybe a new hardware appliance that needs to be deployed out in a facility to address security needs. How do we manage that? So it kind of takes us to the answer. The answer to the question really in this vein is virtualizing the network functions that traditionally have lived in their independent appliances and putting them on a platform that can be managed both by internal resources remotely and tool sets and also by managed services. So if you don't have the staff or team to do things, you also have opportunity to turn over a unified solution to a managed service provider. So this is kind of the picture that I've lived with most of my career on the left here. That's kind of a standard stack you'd walk into in a clinic. And there's things beyond just the sheer number of devices and then attributing a capital cost to each one of those devices and then the soft cost to each one of those devices. There's also costs to the space that you're using for that stack, the power in that space that you have to make sure is there to support this stack, and then the cooling, because now we've got all of these devices that all have high-speed processors that are all kicking out heat, and we have to cool that. And so it becomes very complex outside of just the simple network design, right? So many times the network engineers I've worked in my facilities, will go to, I understand that stack, Dave. I look at that stack. I know each device. I know how to update the firmware on it. I really understand that stack. But there's these other forces, the cooling, the heating, the space. When you're talking about trying to deploy solutions, whether it's in an acquisition or an affiliation, and the first thing you say is, I'm walking into a facility and I have to put this stack in there, and now I have to spend a bunch of capital money on power and cooling and then just infrastructure to support that stack. It becomes sometimes cost prohibitive, as we're talking to at UC Health, when we're talking to facilities about, what is the cost model for us to provide services to you. You have to factor this stuff in, and sometimes it prohibits the capability of doing what really is the right thing to do, which is partner with them to give them help and services, whether it's EHR or just IT services. So the solution really comes down to this concept of virtualizing all of these network functions, because what this can do is reduce everything down, that entire stack, to one box that has its own single power requirement and its space requirement and its cooling requirement. And then being able to choose your stack of virtual network functions. Because many times, as I've said, with network engineers, they have their own preferred way of doing things and their own preferred vendors and knowledge. Like, if you have a network engineer that knows Fortinet and maybe doesn't know Cisco, then you have choices within this stack to still, match what your skill set of your team is. And then compile that into a solution that addresses, security, performance, supportability into one device. It's really quite an elegant solution. So in order to successfully deploy it, it's not, this is not pixie dust, and nobody's waving a magic wand saying, oh, this will just be the answer to everything you need. There's considerations and design. So when you look at these 7 pillars of successfully deploying this virtualization, you have consulting and design, DevOps, project management to get this solution for your organization defined. You have then the implementation of that design. You do have hardware, server modules that has to support this virtualized software-based networking solution. Then you have the software to orchestrate and manage and control this, right? So you don't want to be back in the same boat of having a one-off management, just because something's virtualized. You don't want to have to go into each separate virtualized solution and perform maintenance and manage and configure. You do want to be able to orchestrate that with the DNFVI solution. And then, of course, you add the broadband circuits, whether internet, Metro Ethernet, MPLS, LTE, wireless, multiple solutions. The concept of business continuity and redundancy really comes into play here, in that, ideally you want at least 2 diverse paths of information flow. So we introduce those. And then the stack of functions that go on top of it, back to routing, firewall, wireless, all of the tools that you need and choose to go on that stack and get those implemented. And then once the solution is deployed, then we're back to monitoring and maintenance. And when you look again back to the 3 pillars of performance, security, and supportability, we're positioning ourselves in a better place to be able to meet those pillars with fewer resources, both from a capital and a operating expense perspective, when you look at everything as a whole. The next concept really is, it's really hits home with me coming from smaller hospital support. I still always come back to, wow, that's a great solution. How am I going to run all of that? You know, I've got one network guy, I've got two network guys. How am I going to do this? Once you kind of step into that rolling concept of total cost of ownership and operating and expense management, I think looking at managed services, looking at a partner that can perform these functions, maintain and operate, as well as install and design, and take some of that pressure off your day-to-day staff, I've found to be an extremely valuable tool to put in the bag. Many times this gets equated. I really like the term managed service because sometimes people equate it to, well, you know, you're talking about outsourcing. You're talking about outsourcing our staff, and it's like, no, what we're really talking about doing is mapping function, feature, solution to its total cost to run. And what would you rather have your own internal staff doing, knowing that you're going to have limited internal staff? Your resources are going to be constrained on how many people you can have to do all the work that needs to be done. It's mapping the actual solutions to what their costs are. And that can actually be great for both helping manage budget and internal resources, as well as being able to cost out. If you're doing an affiliation like we do in Colorado, you know, those costs get passed on to the partner. You can't just give that stuff for free. So you're needing to pass those costs on. So how are you going to derive what those costs are? Well, if you have this solution fully managed all the way from the build all through all 7 steps to the end, it's very easy to derive what the actual monthly cost would be. And then you're staying above board, you're passing the costs through that need to be passed through, and you have a solution that can actually be talked about in totality, as opposed to, you know, how are we just going to get you access to our EHR? You know, further to that, when you know that entire solution is managed, you're going to meet those 3 pillars, and you're going to keep your clinical people in business. You know, you're going to meet the SLAs because now you have a partner that you're contractually obligated to for managing that, and they can take care of that whole thing. So, you know, as the slide illustrates, that ends up being addressing what our concerns were earlier. Our SLAs go up, or meeting our SLAs go up, our capital expense goes down, and our operating expense goes down. And I would argue, even if it doesn't go down, at least you know, one thing for sure is you know what it is. Whereas I would suggest in the prior solutions with a stack of hardware and people and licensing and operating costs, it's very hard to derive what does it take to run this solution. And therefore, it's hard to pass that cost on or even budget as you go forward. So in summary, you know, the key takeaways from a virtualized edge ends up being the flexibility of both a quick turn up, right? So once you kind of get through the design phase of a solution for a remote location, that's a template that can be replicated as many times as you want. So that leads to quicker turn up, whether it's a temporary site or a permanent site. The choice. So let's just say midstream, your security officer or internally you decide, you know, I don't want to use the Fortinet firewalls anymore. I want to use Cisco, or I want to use Palo Alto. You can change without changing the hardware and going through this massive effort to address all of your edge locations. The security, I think, you know, many of you and me in my career for sure have always spent my sleepless nights worried about, am I correctly patched and upgraded on my licensing and my software that provides security for my edge? And how do you keep on top of that? I think the orchestration and the managed service combination is what lends to that, peaceful sleep, knowing that that is being taken care of, that, all of the attack vectors are being covered by manufacturer patches and updates that need to be done in a broad scale across all locations. And installation, having multiple network functions without, I think this speaks to the physical install that I was talking about, the costs associated with cooling and cabling and power. It really simplifies that and makes that, easier to deploy, cheaper, and easier to cost out. And then, of course, reducing the downtime. I think the most important thing that we talked about earlier is the fact that we don't want to impact what the clinicians are doing with the patients out at the edge. That performance concept of the pillar that I brought up really is about uptime and really is about, not impeding the use of the critical systems that the clinicians need to provide the patient care. We're in an environment now where you can't have downtime. I remember having a conversation several years ago with a couple of CIOs in Colorado, and we were talking about, larger scale outages and how do you address downtime. And one of the traditional answers has always been, we have downtime procedures, Dave. Like, we have downtime procedures. If we had a major outage, we have a downtime procedure, and that is to go to these, systems that store up patient reports, and you print them out and you go around to conduct your care. And my retort to that in this day and age is, you're not providing, you have downtime procedures, but they will not meet the mark of saying that you're providing the same care. Because when those systems, those EHR systems are down, you lose decision support. You lose best practice alerts. You lose everything that we've been pitching on why hospitals and clinics and providers should be using EHRs if you go to downtime. So we're in a phase where actual downtime is just not an option. I mean, you will not be able to provide the same level of care in a downtime situation. So while this only addresses, one angle of that, and that's the network, it's an important angle. If they can't connect to your system, certainly they're down. So we need to make sure that we have the redundancy and the security and the capability at that edge to keep those systems up, at least keep the network up. Problems around the server stack and data center on the host side is, a whole different problem, but at least we can address this and know that we're dealing with maintaining a network that we know has failover capability, redundancy. We have monitoring tools to see what we're providing bandwidth-wise and how it's performing, and we can address that one angle for those remote locations. And with that, I will wrap it up and see what kind of questions we have out there. Bridget, I guess I will turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, we do have a few questions in here, but I do want to remind the audience before we get started that you can continue to send in your questions using the Ask a Question panel on your screen. Our first question here, our CMIO is very focused on clinician experience. How could I use edge virtualization to help us improve in this area?
Well, I hope we've addressed that. I think the key there is that what I've tried to underscore and what we've talked about is, all of this is not IT for IT's sake. All of this is to support the clinician's experience, end user experience. So while we're addressing one specific angle of that, which is maintaining network connectivity at the required level to give them the correct user experience, that is our focus with this network component. We do not want a clinical person to be having, slow responses from their EHR, downtimes that they're dealing with, anything that gets in the way of providing that clinical care, we want to take off the table. And again, we're addressing one specific angle of that, and that's the network. But it's a key angle when we're talking about, wide-ranging locations. It's very important that that's just not a worry anymore, and I think this solution addresses that.
Yeah, and if I could jump in too, David, you're absolutely right about everything. There's another part too in the projects we've done in this arena. Especially if you have a system, where you have clinicians that go from site to site, and you've had some M&A activity. Sometimes, like, there's small variations in the network infrastructure or how people connect to what they connect to or through to get to the tools they need to treat patients and to do their work. So there's another sort of value here around standardization of the technology, right? So it becomes the same everywhere. So that user experience of how they address the network, how they get access to the network, how the network behaves, should be the same for every clinician across every location if this is done correctly.
All right, thank you both. Our next question, can this solution support the network devices I am currently using?
Sure, Bridget, I'll take that. Good question. The short answer is yes. You go back to the slide that Dave had several slides ago. We had a picture of kind of the current state of most kind of clinic closets or small site closets. I mean, a lot of those devices are actually can be transferred as just virtual applications, right? So you take the same technology that the team understands, knows how to architect for and support, and you just migrate those to a single platform. So the short answer is yes.
All right, great, thank you. The question here, if our organization wanted a managed service for this solution that included the carrier circuits, is that something you could provide? And could we also include LTE connectivity?
I guess I'll take that one as well, Bridget. I would say if David covered sort of the value of a managed service in pretty good detail, but what we are seeing is a need for sort of to speed this time to value, the ability to sort of start gaining, either the flattening of OpEx and CapEx or the overall reduction while speeding, the ability to get to these benefits. Having a managed service provider that has the capability of taking, carrier circuits, LTE connectivity, and bundling those into the service and managing and maintaining those would be something that we do recommend, and we do have a lot of customers that want that. The real benefit there is, if you're with a healthcare system that spans a significant geography, you may have carriers that offer sets of services in one place but not another. So finding a managed service provider or a system integrator to partner with that can sort of own that legwork and own the overhead around ensuring each carrier understands what the requirements are for the solution and what's going to be measured and managed and monitored, I think can add a lot of value.
All right, awesome, thank you. We have one more question here. We just completed a HIMSS Infram assessment. We're currently waiting for our results. How could this technology help us get to Infram stage 7?
Well, congratulations on the Infram assessment. We think that's time well spent, so good for you. How this technology can help kind of someone on the journey of looking at Infram and trying to get to one of the 8 stages from the place and time and capabilities that exist today up to stage 7 is, given that this is a virtualized infrastructure, right? And in some of the slides David showed, he showed you the type of technology you can deploy, whether it's virtualized routers, virtualized firewalls, virtualized IPAM. All those technologies are relevant in terms of helping an organization improve care delivery, reduce cyber and infrastructure risk, really create that pathway for infrastructure development that's tied to business and clinical outcomes. And because of the capabilities and the software-driven nature of this and the breadth of the solutions, I mean, if it's an application that can be virtualized, you can run it in this environment. So depending on where you are in your benchmarking, if you're at a stage 3, 4, 5, your path forward to the next stage, I'm fairly confident that there's a solution within this portfolio that can help you get there.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And, at this time, we will wrap up, but I do want to say thank you so much to David Raftery and David Bingham for a wonderful presentation. I would like to invite our audience to complete the evaluation at the conclusion of today's event, and please share your thoughts with us. And as a last reminder, today's session will be made available for 1 year through the HIMSS Learning Center. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.